For those of you who are just joining us, welcome to another workshop with Tracy Johnson Media Group. We are excited that you are part of today's presentation, and we look forward to getting started here in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, you can use the chat box anytime you like to comment, tell us where you're from, where you're watching from today. And you can also use that chat box for questions anytime. So we'll be getting started here in just a couple of minutes. Please stand by. Once again, thank you for coming to the workshop. I'm Tracy Johnson, along with Andy Meadows and Mike Shepard, consultants and talent coaches from the Tracy Johnson Media Group. And we are proud to welcome you to a new workshop today that I think is going to be insightful. And we're going to pack a ton of information into a short period of time. It's one of those that you probably want to go back and watch this on demand several times to get all of that. And you'll probably have some questions about it too, which we're happy to answer. We're going to show you how to evaluate ratings results. So we get started this morning, and Andy and Mike, say hello and good morning, or good afternoon, hello, or good evening, depending on where you're from.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. Glad you're here.
So one of the things that we notice in working with our clients is that when the rating report comes out, whether it's Nielsen or BDM or whatever service in your country is releasing results, it's kind of like a report card where everybody gets tense. And even though we know all of the flaws in ratings data, we tend to take it too seriously and put too much credibility and credence into that. And it causes a lot of broadcasters to make mistakes. So today we want to go over some things that you can use ratings for, some things that you can, and how to use it, and some things that you probably don't want to use it for, and how you can apply it to craft a healthy brand, whether it's your radio show or your personality or your station, or and avoid making mistakes that can really screw up brands. We'll talk about a lot of different concepts today. We're going to go over it pretty quickly. Now, Mike, in addition to being a consultant with us, also operates a research company. So, Mike, talk a little bit about the difference between perceptual research and gathering actionable data and ratings information that comes out.
Yeah, ratings data is very quantitative. It's trying to measure the audience. We all know that the inherent flaws and shortcomings that we often see based on sample, sometimes methodology with the rating services. We do, when we're doing a research project, we attack it a little differently. We're looking to understand not only the what, but the why behind what's happening. And, our studies are crafted to get at the issues that that will ultimately perhaps affect a radio station's ratings, but the whys. And that's when you can start to make some decisions. Is your morning show really gaining traction? Are you on track musically? Are you fulfilling your position in the market? Nielsen is never going to tell you all that. Nielsen is going to tell you, based upon this group of people that we got this time, based upon the weighting and the sampling and everything we did, this is our best guess of what your ratings are in the market.
So let's look at what's really happening in the market. What are the real causes of ratings fluctuations? There's really only three. Your ratings go up, your ratings go down. It can be because of something that you have done that has either caused the ratings to increase or decrease. It could be something that has happened in your market. It could be something that a competitor is doing that's affecting you. We just came out of the holiday book, where stations who flip to Christmas music affect every other radio station in their market in a profound way. And it's important to understand that. And that's probably the most profound difference of things happening in a market every year. But there are a lot of other things that influence what happens to radio station ratings as well. And it could be something that the rating service has done. Let's talk about those things. Andy, what are some of the stories that you've seen and some of the impact that, whether it's something that you have done, something that has happened in the market, or something that rating services have done that have caused stations to make ill-advised decisions?
Well, first off, one of the things we like to point at quite often is music, and minor music tweaks don't really affect the ratings that much. A lot of times we'll want to point to, like, a song an hour is not really moving the needle that much one way or the other. And I'm not saying every clock position doesn't matter. It certainly does. It's just that's an easy culprit to look at, and it's not going to explain, especially a massive shift in the ratings. I mean, it's more likely personality related. DJs don't really move the needle on ratings either, but on-air personalities certainly do. They have a major impact. So usually we point to the music first, when a lot of times it's something to do with either contesting we did that didn't connect or personality related.
And it also takes a long time for something that you have done to really have an impact on the ratings in most cases. Mike and I were having a conversation with one of our clients last week where the ratings came out, and it was actually a pretty good ratings report in a diary-based market. And they saw some stations in other formats that popped up. And our client said, man, maybe we should change our music mix because look what happened in this ratings report. Mike, talk about how something you have done may or may not have anything to do with the results that came in.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I mean, we're looking for answers. That, as radio producers, performers, we're knee deep into this stuff, and we think everything we do is going to have some sort of profound effect. And when the ratings aren't what we would want them to be, or if we see somebody across town pop up, we immediately want to ascribe something, that we can fix. And it's not always something we can fix, as you point out. It's market conditions. It's a shift in listening, because of COVID. If it's your sports team is hot, the sports station sucks a lot of men rating in there, and sometimes it's the rating service, they just didn't get it right this time. But the danger is chasing ratings. Chasing ratings is akin to chasing, trying to predict the stock market on a short-term basis. It's very risky.
So as your ratings go up or down, it's going to be one of those three things. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say, so something that's happened in the market, a good point on that is a lot of times when we're in the thick of it, we'll casually listen to the other stations and just kind of have an idea of what they're doing. kind of a mini version of what you and I do, and I know Mike does it on new markets, where you do a full-on market analysis, where you literally look. You're just not going to catch enough things when you're not going to pick up on enough if you're just casually listening. But doing a mini version of that market analysis, where you really dig into what the other stations are doing, are important. I was talking to a client this morning who does a really good job of that. He's always aware of what the other guys are doing. And Mike, I think you made a point about, even keeping little notes, a little notebook about that as it's happening.
Yeah, I used to keep I called it my ratings diary. That was my fun little name for it. But what I would do is just try to track any change we made, certainly, but anything else I noticed in the market, anything I was made aware of. And I always try to get the air staff to, to your point, you can't listen to all the other stations all the time, but trying to find out and understand, other things that were going on in the market in other stations. And it was easier then to go back and go, yeah, that's when we, it maybe it's something to do when we threw the superpowers in, or wait, that's when this station started that major promotion. At least it gives you some context when you're looking back at the numbers.
So let's look at the relationship between Cume and time spent listening. One of the fundamental mistakes I see so many stations make is that if they see their Cume go up, but their time spent listening go down, they think, wow, we don't have an awareness problem. We have a lot of people coming in, but we have a product problem. We need to change something, and vice versa. Right. If their time spent listening goes up, but the Cume goes down, they think, man, our product is right on target. We need to go out and do some marketing. But those two elements are interrelated, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. They're incredibly interdependent. I mean, Cume drives TSL, and conversely, TSL can drive Cume.
Yeah, and Cume is not always a marketing issue, to your point, Tracy. We see this with morning shows, and back to some of the research we do. Stations that don't have terribly compelling personalities, particularly morning shows or product, will ultimately have a Cume problem. People don't want to come in the store because the store is not all that attractive, not because they're not aware of it.
The other relationship between Cume and TSL that is fairly obvious when you really think about it is that if your Cume goes down, you're not losing your best listeners. You're not losing the superfans. We'll talk about superfans and P1s here in just a second. You're losing people who are not your biggest listeners. So your Cume goes down, and what you're going to be left with is a pool of people who are spending more time with you because they're your fans. So what will happen with your average time spent listening? Your time spent listening will go up, right, and vice versa. If your Cume dramatically goes up, maybe you've done some advertising or a direct mail piece or some marketing, or the meters or diaries have just happened to fall in the right place. Your Cume goes up dramatically. It's not super fans that are coming to the party for the first time. It's casuals, and casuals spend very little time listening to you. So what will happen to your average time spent listening? Your average time spent listening is going to go down. So when the Cume goes up, you should expect your time spent listening to go down. When your Cume goes down, you should expect the time spent listening to go up. They are absolutely interrelated. Now, the goal over time is that you're converting some of those people from casuals to P1s and into super fans. But P1s are not fans. And this is another mistake I see a lot of stations make. A ratings report will come out and they'll say, wow, look at our P1 report. They'll get into PD Advantage and they'll start dissecting the book and say, look at all of our P1s. Man, we're really converting a lot of people into fans. But are they really fans? What are some of the different categories of P1s, Mike and Andy?
Well, fans are listeners the station has formed an actual real connection with. Just like you were talking before, and a really strong contest can drive a whole bunch of casual Cume, people that are coming in and listening, but if they're not connecting with the product, then they're not fans. They're just casual P1s.
Right. And P1s is a technical term from Nielsen, which just means that person listens to your station more than others. But it doesn't mean that they're necessarily heavy radio users. In fact, they could be very light. So their contribution, they're not a fan. They're just giving you a more contribution than they give anyone else. Kind of the tallest midget in the circus type analogy. And so that's one of them. You talk about the radio prisoners. I'm stuck in this office, with the AC station, because that's what we're going to listen to here.
Yeah, so you've got accidental P1s. Accidental P1s means that I am not a fan of your show. I may not even like your station, but I just happen to listen to your station more than any other station. That can be by 1/4 hour. And a lot of accidental P1s might be P1 to you this week, and that might be the only time they've ever been P1 to your station. But if you just look at the P1 number and say, look, what a great job or what a bad job we're doing in converting listeners into P1s, you're going to make some mistakes in interpreting the data. It's not actionable. So there's accidental P1s. There's the radio prisoners that Mike talked about, where it's not my station of choice. When it is my station, my turn to choose the station, I'm not choosing you, but I still show up as one of your P1s. I'm just not a fan. And then there's those meaningless P1s who listen very little to the radio overall, contribute very few 1/4 hours, and you just happen to be getting more of those 1/4 hours than anybody else. So they show up as a P1 just like anybody else, but they really don't move the ratings needle forward.
Yeah, and Tracy, one thing that we've noticed in the research we've done, we ask a certain question of the P1s, where we try to get their commitment level, and we call them either firm P1s or settlers. And the question is, the XXX is my favorite radio station, only because it's not what I really like, but it's the best that's available. And we had a station that had a high P1 quotient in Nielsen. And then we looked and we said, hey, we don't have strongly affiliated P1s here. So that's important to understand the value of fans over P1s.
And fans are what will ultimately drive your long-term success. That's one of the things that I always emphasized when I was managing stations, is that we want to affect real listeners and let their ratings take care of themselves, because those who happen to be in the panel, in the PPM panel, or happen to be accepting a diary, the respondents are a very different breed. They're cut out of a different cloth. And if you're doing nothing but chasing them, then you're chasing a smaller and smaller pool of people, because those people are different types. And the type of people who will play along with the ratings game has a disproportionate impact on the ratings results that come out. And Mike, I think with your background in research, a lot of times the research respondents are similar to, and you're asking questions to identify the difference between a ratings respondent and an average listener. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we will sometimes ask a question, and we call it the ratings proclivity question, about how likely someone would be to either fill out a diary or carry a PPM device, and then we crosstab those, and you'll see some very different responses and attitudes and just profiles between the two of them.
And that's also that's another reason why I always stress, because it's super easy to be short with or rude with superfans, because they call in constantly, they come to every event and they hover, and it can be annoying. But I always coach people to resist that urge, because those people have an outsized impact on ratings. It's not the greatest system, but that's how it works.
Yeah, you know them by name, you know their family members because they come to every event and they call for every contest. And by the way, that's why a lot of stations will put in a 1 winner per month rule in their contest strategy, which is a huge mistake.
Yeah.
You're telling these contest players who are so engaged with your radio station that they want to play all the time, and the contest player mindset is similar to a meter respondent mindset, and you're telling them to go away for 30 days. Guess what? They will, and they'll go play on your competitor, and they're probably carrying a meter or a diary. Yeah. Another example of mistakes that stations make when the ratings come out is assuming that there's been an actual shift when maybe there isn't. Maybe the ratings just didn't happen to find your listeners in this week, this month, this quarter, or this 2-year period, sometimes based on how Nielsen is leaving the meters with the same people. The 80-20 rule is a fundamental in a lot of businesses, where 20% of your audience makes up about 80% of the consumption. And that's roughly true in radio. In some cases, I've seen it as much as 10% of your audience making up 90% of your listening. But a disproportionate amount of that comes from those super fans that we were talking about. And they're the ones who are playing your contest. They know everything about your radio station. You have nicknames for them. You talk about them behind their backs. All of these things are going on. And those super fans make up a disproportionate amount of your listening. The next category is those P1s. So you add the super fans and the P1s together, and you're probably going to get roughly between 15 and maybe 25%. And the rest are casuals. And the casuals spend far less time with radio and know far less about it than others. When a ratings report comes out and you're looking at numbers like this and you're observing that 80-20 rule, how should a station be looking at this, guys?
Well, clearly, there's only so much you can do to affect the casuals. I mean, certainly externally with tactics and marketing, the old notion of couponing, you can try to get them to sample the station and spend a little more time with you. But that's some heavy lifting. Where you're going to drive your ratings, and you already are driving your ratings, is in that 20% pool of your super fans and your P1s.
Yeah, you also want to, the caution I always give is to make decisions based on trends, not on spikes or dips. I mean, that's the I call them change addicts. A lot of times when the ratings come out, they just feel like, well, we can't, the whole line on insanity doing the same thing over and over again. We got to change something because it was a temporary, it was a spike in the ratings or a dip in the ratings. You don't make a drastic change based on that.
And you do have to look at it over a long period of time, because with the sample sizes, you're going to have periods where bad ratings happen to good stations, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with your product, with your brand. You're right on point. And if you start changing that, you're removing the reason why people consider you a good station and why they like you to begin with. And then you've got a real problem on your hands. So step back and don't do the ratings freak out. Acknowledge that maybe we just got a bad break here. Bad ratings will happen to good stations, and good ratings will happen to bad stations.
Yep.
It's important to understand the difference in between, and we'll talk more about research and where that comes in. Another key to look at is the daily Cume. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it'll get really technical, but when you look at metered markets in general, this is what you're going to find. The average station is getting about a 2 average quarter hour share, but the top 3 stations are getting about a 7.2. Look at what we've highlighted in orange. Where is that where are those ratings coming from? They're coming from one more daily occasion per day. And by the way, this data is about 3 years old. The average daily occasions now are less than that. It's more like on the average station, the average daily occasions is more like 3 to 3.5. And the top 3 stations is more like 4.5, maybe 5. But look at the one extra daily occasion per day, but the daily Cume where people are coming back, it's triple what it is of the average station. So the key for turning those casuals into P1s and P1s into super fans is driving more daily occasions and getting them back more frequently than that daily Cume.
And there's 2 ways to look at that. If you're an underperforming station, we're not really as far apart as you think. And conversely, if you're a station that is dominating a market, you can't coast and think, well, we got this, because it's not that hard to increase those listening occasions just a couple times, and that makes a massive swing.
Yeah, it's a simple formula. It's not an easy thing to accomplish because of the 80% of the audience being casuals. It's hard to motivate those casuals, as Mike pointed out. But if you can get them to just listen one more day per week and one more occasion per day, you can double or triple or perhaps even quadruple your ratings with that. So a few tips. We want to go over a few things and we'll get to your questions. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat box at YouTube right now, and we will stay on and answer those questions as long as you are asking them. But we want to give you a few tips, things that you can take away. And Andy touched on this. You want to track your ratings results over a period of time, which will keep you from making short-term conclusions and knee-jerk reactions. One way to do that is with rolling averages. If you're tracking your ratings, if you've got monthly ratings that come out and you're tracking it over, say, 2 years, you drop off your oldest and add the newest, and you're looking at it over a period of time. Another is to look at it year over year. When seasonal events impact the ratings, it's more important to look at what's happening this October compared to last October and the October before than it is to look at what's happening in October compared to July, because listening is very different from July than it is to October. Behavior and patterns are different, and look at it for multiple years. You guys, how would you advise stations to track their ratings in this way? What's important to look at?
Well, one big mistake that I've been guilty of making, and a lot of people are guilty of making, is don't peruse the data to fit a narrative. Yeah. Like, we already have an idea in our head because we're so in the minutia of it. We're like, I think we should be doing this, and things you've been analyzing. And so you can kind of parse that data in different ways to say different things. And you've got to resist the urge to do that and look at it at the totality of it, and also look at it over trends, and not just try to make it fit into whatever box you want.
Yeah, you've got to look over multiple books. There's a case study of a major market station I work with in an international market, and they had brought in a new morning show that they felt really good about. But he came in after a kind of a marginal, low performing show. Put him on. The numbers were okay in mornings. Put him on, and they started to tank. And then all the second guessing came in. We made a mistake in mornings. God, what did we do here? We spent all this money, yada, yada, yada. We did a research project and showed that, hey, this guy's got traction. This is a measurement issue here. And over time, the show is going to improve. And it did. Within a year, it was number one. But there was that immediate thing of, we changed the morning show, the numbers went down, therefore that's what the problem is. And there's where you get into trouble. I can only imagine if they had decided to move on from that show.
Andy and I are working in a diary market that switched format, and the previous format was primarily targeted to women. The new format is probably 55 or 60% targeted to men. And that was our expectation. Well, the first ratings report came out, and we went to number one in women, and men didn't respond at all. And being a diary market, we really believe that that's probably just holdovers and attitudes and perceptions, but we don't know. And it's dangerous to assume that, wow, this format's really appealing to women more than men. We need to tweak the format and get those men coming in here. So you got to look at it over a period of time. You got to look at it over months and quarters and years to avoid knee-jerk reactions. Ratings data, we've talked about this a couple of times, but ratings data is not actionable research. And any insight you gather from ratings is insight that is in your rearview mirror. There's nothing you can do about the results that are already in. And again, go back to one of the earlier slides we showed you about the three things that can affect ratings. One of them is sample. There's nothing you can do about that. That's going to change. By the time you start making changes, the sample is going to change, and you're looking at apples to oranges. And another is the influences of other stations in the market that are changing the listener pool. And there is actually another influence as well, and that's seasonal changes in listener lifestyles.
Yep.
If I'm a heavy meter carrier, and my family is a heavy meter carrier, and we go on vacation for 2 weeks, guess what? You've lost a lot of quarter hours, a lot of ratings, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's things that it's hard to understand. There's things that you can control, and there's things that you can't. Focus on how you can control your own destiny. Mike mentioned earlier that you need to understand the ratings, but not chase the ratings. Don't chase those meter carriers. The music cycle will affect it for stations. Top 40, if you're a top 40 station and nobody's cranking out any hits, the music cycle goes against you. There's not much you can do to fix that. Other stations will influence it, and the respondent pool. I want to tell a really quick story here about the respondent pool. I was working with a station that was targeting 25 to 54-year-olds. The bulk of their audience was 35 plus, and this is a top 20 market. And almost overnight, this ratings went from consistently in the top 3 to like number 9 or number 10, and it stayed there. And we just kept looking at 25, 54. What has happened to it? Is it the product? What is it? We go back and forth. We finally said, let's look at 35 to 64 and see how we're doing there. Let's open this up and look at that 55 to 64 demo. And we were number 1 by a clear margin. So then the VP of operations started looking into the actual meters, and we found the source of our fall from number 3 to number 10 in 25, 54-year-olds. One of the respondents, one that was a heavy meter carrier, had a birthday. They became a 55-year-old, not a 54-year-old, and we were no longer paying attention to them. And we were looking at how should we tweak our product? How should we change our brand? Because suddenly we're not number 3, we're number 10. And all that happened is one guy had a birthday.
Aged out. One thing I will say about the music cycle is while it is outside of our control, who's cranking out hits and how many they're cranking out within any given format, it is within our control how we respond to it. So if we do want to be making informed decisions based on data, so we're aware that that's going on and we can react accordingly. We can either change the amount of currents, we can lean heavier on recurrence. So it's not like we're saying ignore that. It's just, you can't control whether Harry Styles put out a hit or not.
No, but what you can control is how compelling your morning show is. And I can tell you that the top 40 stations and the country stations that go through, low current music cycles are much more resilient when they have that kind of presence on the radio station. If you're playing 14, 15 songs in morning drive, you're really going to be impacted by the music cycle.
Yep.
Yeah. If you're just a utility, that's danger, Will Robinson. Question about Mike talked about morning shows. Let's talk about morning shows and how to react to personalities when ratings come out. One of the metrics that we like to look at is the Cume percentage. And this will tell you if your morning show has a chance to win, or any day part has a chance to win in that time slot or not. You take the total Cume of the radio station and compare that to the total Cume of the day part. And the percentages in rough numbers look like this. If your morning show is only 20% or less of the radio station's Cume, you got a problem on your hands. That show is not going to do well.
Right.
You're losing and may not be able to resuscitate it. So look at that number. I've seen that as low as about 15%. And if you're under 20%, you're going to have a really hard time. If you're between 20 and 29%, there's a chance there. You're in the ball game. You can win with a show that's getting 20 to 29%. It's all hope is not lost. 30 to 39%, you're solidly in the game. If you're over 40%, that's pretty strong. And if you're 50% or more, you've got a really strong show. Now, there's a lot of things that impact this. Market size, whether you're diary versus metered. If you're looking at, and you want to look at the entire Cume of the market, not just a demographic. If you start slicing and dicing this to different demographics, those percentages should go up. Mm-hmm. If you're targeting 35, 44-year-olds and you look at the 35, 44 Cume, then your percentages that are listening to the morning show should be much higher. So there's things that influence this, but one of the things that we like to look at is how are we trending in our Cume percentage in the morning show? In other words, is there a buzz on this show?
Right. And I think it's really important for most programmers and morning shows to actually look at this number. Most of them are shocked at what the percentage is, because I guarantee most morning shows and a lot of PDs would just assume, 60, 70, 80% of our weekly Cume listens to our morning show. That's simply not the case.
And it can be overwhelming. I always try to warn, if somebody's never done mornings before and they start doing mornings, I kind of explain it. It's like being the QB of the Dallas Cowboys. You've signed up for a lot of scrutiny. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. And we put a lot of emphasis on mornings because of things like, I mean, this shows the impact a strong personality driven morning show can have on the ratings for a radio station. So you're gonna get scrutinized. It's just part of it. But there's a lot of good to that too.
The other cool thing you could do with this, by the way, especially if you're a program director, you've got a morning show that says the only thing that's holding me back from being a wildly number one successful dominant morning show is you're not advertising for me, you're not marketing me, we're not on TV. If we had a direct mail campaign, we would be winning. Well, guess what? I'm guessing in almost every case, less than half of the radio station's Cume is listening in the morning at any time during the week. So let's start there. Let's get those people excited about your show and show me how you can be number one there. So drive that Cume up. Again, we talked about the rear view mirror. Don't chase ratings results. Use ratings to validate whether you're a strong brand and you're moving quickly. If you want to find out more about how the ratings game works, you can download our ebook at tjohnsonmediagroup.com. Do a search there for the ratings game. It goes into a lot more detail on a lot of these concepts that we talked about today and more, with a lot of examples and stories that will either drive you crazy or make you feel better, one or the other, maybe both. And if you want to get answers, again, we talked about what Mike does. Part of what Mike does with Shepard Media Research is help stations find real answers and chart solutions to those answers, rather than relying on ratings alone for making your decisions. Mike, where can they find you? ShepardMediaResearch.com. Also, you can get me through Tracy Johnson Media Group as well.
Yep.
You can reach Mike at tjohnsonmediagroup.com. And if you want to impact the next ratings period, we keep it really simple for you. We'll show you how to double your ratings. We'll show you how, if you can increase the occasions of listening by 1 per day and 1 day per week, your ratings will double. And if you can then convert more of your station's Cume to your morning show, those ratings can quadruple. And we'll show you exactly how that works with the statistics. If you go to tjohnsonmediagroup.com and do a search for double your ratings. The other thing, if you're an insider, you can get access to all of the information as part of your insiders membership. So we do have some questions that were submitted in advance that we'll get to here in just a second. We also will be happy to take your questions right now if you want to type them in the chat box on YouTube, and we will stay on and answer questions about the ratings game, about how to evaluate ratings, about personality radio, about anything regarding the radio industry that you're interested in. And we'll stay on and answer those questions for as long as you like. Just type that into the search box now, or into the chat box now, and we will be glad to answer those. But let's start with a couple that were submitted in advance. First one is, I'm in a small market that doesn't use Nielsen. How do you promote or sell your product?
You can still tell a story. That's where guys like Mike, and I'm sure he'll jump in. That's where guys like Mike can help. But also, whether you're in a small market that doesn't subscribe or isn't tracked at all, or you're in a diary or a PPM market, you shouldn't wait for the report card anyway. You should be tracking a lot of there's a lot of things you can track internally: calls into the studio, digital impressions, contesting signups, especially if they're in specific day parts, that can give you enough data to sell off of, to tell your own. In that situation, you have to tell your own story, but it should be backed up by data.
Right. If there are certainly things you can track, keeping track of statistics. I mean, people who showed up at a previous event. I mean, there are a lot of metrics out there that you can use to your advantage if you don't have ratings. And obviously, we do that in some small markets where we'll kind of serve as that. It's a little difficult because the station has commissioned the study, but hey, the numbers are the numbers, as they say. So that can be another alternative if you're not rated.
One of the things Andy said, I think, is really profound. I want to repeat it because he said you should use data to back up your story. Data is not your story. Have your sales story and why advertisers should access your listeners and how they can do that. and back that up with the data that you have that shows them how many people are responding. But that is not your story. And I see so many stations who are slaves to the ratings process because there's some young media executive at an ad agency who's looking at a spreadsheet and just buying off of the rankers. And especially the question came in about being in a small market. Chances are there's not that much agency business being sold, being bought in a small market like that. Have a relationship, go past the media buyer, get to the business owner, and talk to that guy who owns the Japanese restaurant and say, how many people do you really need to come into your restaurant to become regular customers for your advertising to be a success? You'll be shocked at the low number of people. He can't handle hundreds and hundreds of people coming in for the first time this week to have dinner at his restaurant. They're not equipped for that. They need a few. And if you have a relationship with the advertisers and a relationship with listeners, your job as a radio station is to introduce one to the other and tell your story. Learn to tell that story creatively instead of just positioning against other stations that are on the ranker. Follow up to that, I'm not sure if it's from the same person or not, but said, is it still worth it to subscribe to the rating services?
Yes, I believe it is. I mean, obviously there's individual circumstances but this is the system that we have and that a lot of media buyers use. So I think it's worth it. I think you should do it. I think you should supplement it though with things you do on your own or through a company like Mike's company.
Yeah, I mean, it depending upon the market size and resources, obviously you've got to determine where those resources should be placed. But clearly, that's the currency. You know, the ratings is the currency. The bigger market you're in, to Tracy's point about transactional business, you kind of have to play the game. It's an imperfect science. I don't see it becoming perfect anytime soon, but it's the game, and we should try to do our best to play it to our advantage.
This question came in from a market manager who said, my staff is incentivized, the personalities and the program director are incentivized based on ratings results, and it carries a big impact when the ratings come in. How do I keep the staff from freaking out over a bad book?
Well, I do think there's nothing wrong with ratings incentives. I also think there's nothing wrong with incentivizing other things as well. I mean, you've got to be careful that outside of radio, there's a lot of businesses that have gotten in trouble with the best of intentions, incentivizing something. I remember Wells Fargo's scandal. I mean, that had a lot to do with it. They incentivized the wrong thing. I'm not saying you shouldn't incentivize ratings. There's just a whole bunch of other things you can also incentivize. And especially if you're trying to drive specific things, it might not be you shouldn't be the only thing you incentivize.
Yeah, we have some stations that are incentivized actually on the perceptual data that they get once a year because they believe that's more actionable. If you're going to incentivize on ratings, one way to do it is to make sure that you may want to do it over a rolling average to kind of soften out some of those bumps. Make sure that and with any goal, you've got to make sure that it's a reachable stretch. You want them to be able to attain it if it helps the station make money. But you also don't want to make it so impossible that it removes the incentive to achieve it.
And also, I had a policy when I was running my stations that we would never celebrate a great ratings report. And we would never feel bad about a bad ratings report. Keep an even keel, keep focused on the process. And our goal was that we would do great radio, because if we do great radio that causes the audience to respond, the ratings eventually will take care of themselves. And we will have far more good books than bad. And you'll cash more ratings bonus checks than not. And so you keep focused over the long term, repeating a lot of the things that we've already talked about today. Next question is, I'm in a small market, in a diary market, and we only have 2 ratings periods a year. How do you gauge how you're doing in between those ratings reports?
Yeah, again, what we said earlier about not waiting for that report card. I mean, there's so many things that you can track internally that were a lot harder when I started in this business and are significantly easier and less expensive to track now.
Yeah, we actually work with some of our stations that do their some internal surveys on the station overall and the morning show. You have to understand that it's skewed. It's not a representative sample of the market, but you can certainly track and trend among your own P1s and fans how you're doing. If you start seeing some real attrition or some discomfort or unhappiness with your fans, that's a big sign, and it's something to pay attention to prior to the next ratings report. You certainly don't want to wait for that to come out before you do anything. But again, doing it for a reason rather than a knee-jerk reaction.
Well, I would do that. Go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, just the great thing about tracking all that stuff on your own is it does insulate you a little bit from those ratings up and downs that you talked about, Tracy. I mean, because you have a little bit of a story to tell on your own.
Right. Yeah, I like doing that at the beginning when a new show comes on. Do a perceptual online survey. They're basically free, and get a baseline for how the audience perceives the personalities, perceives the show, perceives the station, what they like about it, what they don't, and then follow up with a similar survey once per quarter and track how that's changing from one quarter to the next. Ask about the features. What features do you like? What do you not like? How do you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10? That way you can see how you're trending, which will eventually come out in the ratings wash. The ratings will catch up with reality at some point. And it'll keep you from freaking out, and it'll keep you focused on what's really important, which is driving listener reaction. So I would highly recommend that if you want to get an idea of some questions to ask for it, or the process of how we recommend doing it. You can get that at insidersradionetwork.com. There's an article there with details on how to get basically free radio research. Just do a search for free radio research or free research, and it'll bring up that article. All right, let's get to
remember is about perception preceding reality. Anytime you change something, before you're actually going to see it reflected in the ratings, it's going to be a period of time. People start to develop a perception about you, and then their behavior follows that.
Yeah, especially with an online research with just your fans, they're going to be way ahead of the casuals. Let's get to some of the questions in the chat box. Again, you can type that into the chat box at YouTube on YouTube Live, and we'll answer these as long as we can. A lot of you, hey, thanks for saying hi. We got people from Tallahassee and Peoria and Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. DJ Nasty, hey, how you doing? Congratulations on the promotion to APD at Jams in Miami. It's a good client there, DJ Nasty and Super Cindy in the morning. Gary, welcome. Martha Quinn up in San Francisco, former MTV VJ is on, and enjoy your vacation. And thank you for coming on live. We appreciate you and appreciate you being in touch. Brennan says, if ratings are the lag measures in the rearview mirror, what are some lead measures we can use to influence success?
That's kind of a loaded question. I think it comes down to, good radio. I mean, what you said earlier, Tracy, is something I've always believed in when I was programming, is that if you do good radio, if you're doing the right things, the ratings are going to catch up. So, a lot of what you need to do, and it goes back to the old research group days, and Bill Moyes used to say, attack yourself, make sure that what you're doing matches the intended strategy. Many times we think we're doing something with the product, the morning show, whatever. And if we took a few seconds and looked back on it and reflected on it and actually analyzed it, maybe the reality of what's coming out of the speakers isn't what we intended.
Yeah, and also constantly coaching your staff to interact and engage with the audience as much as humanly possible. I mean, I literally used to track how many calls come into the studio as a way to gauge whether or not content was working. And the great thing about the more you interact and engage with your audience, the other side benefit is you're going to identify content topics that you need to talk about, and the secret sauce, you're going to identify some respondents that are more likely to fill out a diary or carry a PPM in the process of that.
Putting an exclamation point on that, Jazzy Jim Archer from KMVQ in San Francisco just popped on to say hello. And I'll brag on his morning show, and the way that Jim managed and encouraged that show, because for a period of time, the ratings weren't pretty. And there were a lot of things that were working against the show, from changes that had happened on the show to a new chemistry, a new team that was working together, to being down a female presence on the show, the music cycle going against Top 40. And Jim kept the show focused on where we were going, not on where we were now or where we've been on the past, and kept that encouragement up and that focus on the goal. And the show has grown to #1 in San Francisco. And it is truly one of the shows that we are most proud of at Tracy Johnson Media Group. And it's all because of the way that the Jazzy Jim was able to stay focused and lead them and give them confidence that what they were doing is the right thing, regardless of what this week or this month or this quarter was showing. And that has paid off. And now the ratings are catching up with the show's performance. It's a great example of how you program to the audience, and the ratings will take care of themselves. Exactly what we've been talking about. Silvano says, how do you perform listening research? This is a question from Mike. Depending on a method, we can have different results. Do you use People Meter, which is used for TV, or do you call random people on phone or mobile? What's your methodology, Mike? What do you recommend?
Well, mostly today it's transferred to online. I mean, we don't really have PPM devices to mirror what Nielsen does, but it's online, sometimes with a mix of telephone these days, simply because that's where people are willing to participate. It's evolved over time. You all remember that the music test happened on one night, and it was usually the snowiest night in Portland, Maine, and nobody showed up. Now we do most of that online, and it appears to be the most effective methodology. Again, we are measuring audience, but we're measuring perceptions and the why behind what's happening, as opposed to just counting bodies.
And there's a lot of different methodologies too. If you're looking for deeper insight into questions that you already have, that might be a focus group where you only need 10 or 12 people in a room that you're talking to. If you're testing content on a personality-based morning show, doing that with dial technology is really effective. So it depends on what answers you're trying to get to as to what methodology you want to apply to it. Gary says, it seems like CHR product isn't very good anymore as opposed to Top 40 in the early 80s. What's your take? Everything's cyclical. No, it's not as good compared to the early 80s when Madonna and Prince and Michael Jackson and Wham and Duran Duran and the whole new wave movement and MTV was just like you couldn't get out of the way of the hits in the early 80s. But that's cyclical, and it moves around. My take is that Top 40 music's starting to get better than it was a year or two ago.
Yeah, we're seeing a resurgence there, but to your point, Tracy, it is cyclical. And I remember programming KSON in what we called the glory days of the 90s, the Garth era, and that was wonderful. But we had a pretty good stretch before that where we were in the doldrums, and and Top 40 was king. So it does cycle, and again, your best insulation to that is musically is to be more familiar, obviously, and take less chances on bad music, but having a good, strong personality profile on the station, particularly in morning drive, that's what's going to get you through those droughts.
And I think it's already bouncing back. I think it's on the way back right now, but like you said, adjust accordingly. I mean, you can't have this template that you've built and okay, we've got 5 currents in this category, we've got 7 in this one and 9 in this one, and I'm going to stick to that no matter what. You have to adjust that based on the data at that given time. And also so the other challenge I see is things that people don't necessarily have the right bar for things getting added into the station on the front end, but they also have a live in perpetuity rule where, like, once it makes it in the database, it cleared our high bar on the front end. It needs to stay in there forever. Okay, well, That's not realistic.
Yeah.
There's so many stations who think, okay, here's my current bucket. Here's my bucket that is filled with songs that are currents. I got to fill it.
Yeah.
And here's my recurrent bucket. And here's my gold bucket. Why not look at what songs are going to move the audience and adjust your system to fit the supply instead of expanding the supply to fit your system? And that's
Exactly.
making your music scheduling.
And that applies to every new music format, you know?
Yeah.
That is all the questions that I see in the queue. I want to thank you so much for coming to our workshop and being part of how to evaluate ratings results. If you'd like to share this with some colleagues, with your staff, it'll be available on demand almost immediately. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. We do regular workshops every 2 to 3 or sometimes 4 weeks, but every couple of weeks we come on and do these. And we love having you be a part of it. If you have a suggestion for a topic for an upcoming workshop, we would love to get to that. You can drop me an email, Tracy, Tracy, at tjohnsonmediagroup.com. Thank you again very much. We look forward to seeing you on the next workshop.
Thanks, everybody.